Thank you for having us come and present. My name is Rosie Alegado. I'm faculty in oceanography as well as Hawaii Sea Grant. And Katy and I have been doing, and Katy Hintzen here is an extension agent in Hawaii Sea Grant. And we've been doing a lot of work in the realm of research ethics. And as part of that, thinking about attention to Indigenous data sovereignty, because we're at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Many of the research projects that we do directly interface with Native communities. And I think it's really important that as we aspire to becoming a Native Hawaiian place of learning, we should start thinking about how does that, how does that kind of feed into and interface with the very research that we do. As a way of introduction, I just want to give you an introduction to the places and my family members where I'm from. So, O Louisa Oi Wong Kong, no Waihe'e Hawaii, no Waihe'e Maui, no Hoya Daniel Kalona McGregor, no Kalua Nui Oahu. Hanau o Daniel Pamoahu McGregor, no Kula Kula. O Daniel Pamoahu McGregor, no Kalua Nui. No Hoya Anita Valerie Branco, no La Hoi Hoi. Hanau o Daviana Pomeka'i McGregor, no Kula Kula. O Daviana Pomeka'i McGregor, no Ka'ipi Kula. No Hoya Dean Timorsho Alegado, no Summer Cecil Zambales, Philippines. Hanau o Rosie and Lenny Alegado, no Kula Kula. O Waiale'e o Ahu, Kulaiwi. O Ahui Manu Ku'aina. O Ma Eli Eli Ku'u. O Kawapu Aihale Ku'ua. O Laloa. Mahalo. So in this introduction, I want to share with you not only the place names of where I come from across Hawaii and the world, but also my ancestors as a way of acknowledging the places that I come from and the places that have lived and the people who have shaped who I am today. So today, as I said, myself, Katy, and in this project, we're also joined by Sara Kahanamoku, who wasn't able to be here today because there's so many meetings and presentations going on this week. We are here to talk about CARE's principles for Indigenous data governance. So I wanted to start off by just having a conversation with everybody. What is data? And so I know all of you have smartphones or laptops, so please break them out. Please go to www.mentic.com and it'll ask you to put in a code. Hopefully I have enabled sharing and you should be able to see a question. And so now I'm gonna log out and I go to this thing.
Yeah, maybe give them a sec to put in the number.
Oh yeah, this is the number right up here.
Okay, yeah, you're good.
You're good? Okay.
I don't know if the online people, you may need to share this.
Let me go back one slide. Okay, and you should be able to put in some answers. You should be able to put in up to 3 different answers. And we should be able to, my goal is it'll make a word cloud for us that I can somehow maybe download for later.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, so we'll give ourselves about a minute to time us. Okay, so you have 1 minute to put in everything. What is data? Quantitative, information, value, leverage, analyzer. Okay, information seems to be coming up really good. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. I see the word numbers. I see quantitative. This is all very interesting because I'm hoping today to kind of blow your minds with that definition. Ooh, I see mo'olelo. What else do you see, Katy? Oh, I thought qualitative. I thought power. I don't know if they mean like power statistics, like statistical power, but like
I thought they meant like powers and Marxism.
Yeah. So okay, very good. So all right, I think we've gotten a good handle of where we're at. So this is kind of, I like to use this as just like a temperature check for where we are when we start this talk. Okay. And I hope that through our discussions today, we can maybe capture a little bit more and go a little bit deeper into detail. So kind of thought about what you guys might say, and the mainstream, we're going to call that mainstream definition of data is measurements or statistics that are used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation, or even modeling. And that comes from Merriam-Webster's definition. So it's pretty close to like what most of you guys said. So here's the next question is, now you guys have kind of told us what you think data is. It's the same one. I just need to Sorry, I need to go change the slide if I can figure out how to do that. Uh-oh. There we go. Let me go to the next question. Okay. Sorry, this is my first time doing Menti and Zoom at the same time. So you should be able to now type in, it's that same code, and we'll see, this time we'll see them instead of a word cloud, because you can put a longer response, we'll see things coming across. Everyone, 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 everyone. Everybody thinks everyone. This is so interesting. Depends on the situation. I like that. I like the variety. Those who have taken data myself and those who I expressly allow. Ooh, depends, especially the communities they impact because of the project. Depends. Let's try and scroll down. People who need it, taxpayers. That's right. If you're federally funded, if your money comes from the federal government, that's a requirement. Depends on the function and use of the data. This is so interesting. We went from everyone to actually maybe rethinking that. So I thought that's really, really exciting. Okay, so let's hold on to those. So data, you guys had that definition, and who should have access to the data? It started off being extremely broad, and I thought it was really interesting how as a group and collective, we kind of got a little bit more narrow. Okay, so let's go back to here. What is Indigenous data? I'm not going to ask you for your definition, but because I want to give it to you. So Indigenous data in a nutshell is the data, information, and knowledges in any format that impacts Indigenous peoples, nations, and communities at both the collective and individual levels. And if we kind of think about the categories of what is data, and as we go through this, I want you to think about, is it possible that I've ever collected what might qualify by this definition as Indigenous data? Okay, so it could be data about our non-human relations, like data about land, water, we're talking of Indigenous peoples, geology, titles, air, soil, sacred ecosystems, territories, plants, animals, etc. Or data about Indigenous peoples as individuals, which actually applies to all of us too, because we're all, to kind of think about that category. Administrative, legal, health, social, commercial, corporate, services, etc. I think people like Google and Facebook, what the heck does Meta know about us? And then there's also data about Native peoples as collectives, like traditional knowledge systems or languages, or ancestral and clan knowledges. So just by show of hands, knowing that you're in Hawaii, which is a place where Native people are, how many of you have collected, whether or not you knew it or not, but now you know, Indigenous data? Okay, awesome. So like this talk is pretty applicable to most of us. Really cool. Okay. All right. I think it's suffice to say that Indigenous peoples themselves have always been collecting data about themselves. These images here depict the ways in which Indigenous data has been kind of put into tangible forms. So we know that a lot of Indigenous people are mostly oral traditionalists, but they have also expressed their knowledge that they have in things like totem poles and things like this is a wampum belt, in items such as this animal skin here. So these are all different ways that people want to kind of make more permanent some ideas about knowledge and have put it in, it's not written form, but it's pictographic form. So what are Indigenous data? Again, it is very much any data, any format that impact Indigenous lives. Now, I want to make this distinction because when we think about, that's like, what are the categories? But there's more than just that. I think there's like a whole knowledge system that comes with thinking about Indigenous data and comparing that to the way that we, and certainly I was raised thinking about science. I'm going to call, you could think of it as Western science. Another way to think about it, and I'm going to say it, I don't want anybody to get offended, is we can also think about the system as settler colonial science. Settler colonial science, I think about what we all put down as what is data, is quantitative. Check. Many of us said that when we were asked about the definition of data. It's, guess what? Observations made by a small group of professionals. That's us. We're like professionals, right? We're scientists, we're researchers. It's synchronic data. Synchronic means it's data that's a point in time. We say that this data is objective. And we also have this additional thing where we say that this knowledge is held, I'm going to use the word held instead of owned. It's held by individuals, like we collected it, it's our data, as well as institutions like the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Okay, that can sometimes come in direct conflict when we think about access or even ownership of data with other knowledge systems. I'm going to use the word indigenous here, but I also want to recognize that like indigenous people aren't a monolith. These are just some of the more kind of general kind of commonalities versus indigenous science practices, often known as well traditional ecological knowledges. Those are both qualitative and quantitative. I think a really important distinction is the observers who collect this scientific knowledge are resource users. They're actually using the information, right? They're not like esoteric professionals. They're also in these societies can be esoteric professionals, but everybody's collecting the data. It's diachronic data, meaning that it's data that is then enfolded into a multi-generational historical timeline of what these peoples know about that information or resource. From the outside, we say that it is subjective. And then this is something that's really important, which is why we're here today to talk about indigenous data sovereignty, is unlike in settler colonial scientific terms where knowledge is held by individuals and institutions, indigenous science practices are knowledges that are held by the collective. It's collective knowledge of a people. No one person owns that knowledge. This is where the conflict lies. And this is what we need to talk about. Okay, so I kind of already set up data, indigenous data. I'm going to try and define all the terms in my title, just in the title, and that'll give us the whole talk. Now I'm going to talk about sovereignty and indigenous sovereignty. So sovereignty, I'm going to get really specific because we're at a United States institution. So in the US, and I'm going to start kind of having you think about indigenous sovereignty in the US, there are specific recognitions of different indigenous peoples. Tribal sovereignty refers to the rights of recognized tribes to govern themselves. And when recognized entities have the right to govern themselves in the United States, they're generally responsible for what happens on their land. Now, I want to be clear, Native Hawaiians do not have federal recognition status as a tribe. We are recognized as a people, a political entity, but not a race. So there's all these crazy terms, right? There's, what race are you? And that's kind of like, am I black, white, brown? I don't even know. There's your ethnicity, right? Ethnically, I am Filipino, Portuguese, Chinese, German, Scottish, Hawaiian. But then there's also political groups. So Native Hawaiians are not politically recognized, but I also want to make that distinction between race, ethnicity, political group. It's all very confusing. And I also want to recognize these are very much so United States conceptions of race and ethnicity and some such. The main thing is sovereignty is self-determination. And it's the extent to which a nation is able to make and enforce its own rules, resolve disputes, problem solve when those don't work well as much as people like, and establish its own governing institutions. Okay? So when we put that together, sovereignty with data, the mainstream ideas around data sovereignty and data governance is it's the concept that information which has been stored and converted, right, digitized in binary form, should be subject to the laws of the country in which it is located. And data governance refers to the ownership, collection, and control and analysis and use of that data. So that's like the mainstream ideas under settler colonial science ideas of what is even data. So let's start thinking about what might indigenous data sovereignty look like, and also like we said, there's this like inherent conflict too, potentially. So the reason why I want to talk about sovereignty too is because Indigenous peoples in the US and all across the world, but in the US, have really been disempowered by a lot of Indigenous policies. So, starting way back when Manifest Destiny comes along, it's like, we have the inherent right of God to go and like claim this land for like God's people, which in their mind is European folk. They then pass all of these different laws to forcibly remove Indigenous peoples from their land, forcibly remove like from their life ways. Also, that quote unquote data, that quote unquote knowledge. And you can see I put a little bit of space in between. There's the Indian Removal Act, the Homestead Act, the Mining Act, the Dawes Allotment Act, the Wilderness Act. All of these are federal policies designed to disempower Native peoples. And in Hawaii specifically, there we go. I just highlighted in red because our timeline was totally independent until 1893, when we were illegally overthrown by the United States. So that's why I put that space in, because then there's very Hawaii specific things. So we were on our own trajectory, but then we got like sucked into US policy in the 1890s. And you have in 1898, the annexation of Hawaii to the United States. In 1901, the Organic Act comes in, and it really like allows the United States to kind of just do takings of land for its own purposes. And then of course, 1959, you have statehood. So all of these have served the purpose of further disenfranchising Hawaiians. And I also want to say that something really important as far as like the taking of our land base is today, the military controls about 5% of Hawaii's lands. At one point, it controlled even more. It controlled the entire island of Kaho'olawe, but that was returned to the Hawaiian people in 1984. Okay, so US policies have worked to wear down and erode Indigenous sovereignty. So where does Indigenous data sovereignty come in? So it does stem from tribal sovereignty positioned within federal and state recognition. Hawaii doesn't have that, supposedly, but I'm going to show you it does. Court cases and treaties. Okay, so just bear with me for a little bit longer before I get to the Hawaii specific part. So Indigenous data sovereignty then is the right of Indigenous people and nations to govern, this is how it comes together with data, the collection, ownership, and application of their own data. So first, it derives from their inheritance rights to govern their own lands, peoples, and resources. And then it also has really strong kind of like origins and genesis in the traditions, roles, and responsibilities for those communities to hold that information. It is positioned within, in the United States, the federal kind of system, right? Within human rights framework, within court cases, within treaties. And then that knowledge then belongs to the collective, and it's fundamental to who we are as Indigenous people. So that's kind of how we kind of think about Indigenous data sovereignty and the evolution of that. It's not really separatable from all of the crazy history stuff, even though we like to think that science, we don't want to be political, but our Indigenous data sovereignty is inherently rooted in political things. Okay. So, if Hawaiians aren't federally recognized, do we even have Indigenous data sovereignty? Who even owns Hawaiian knowledge? This is just a smattering of crazy collections from the internet of like people utilizing Hawaiian knowledge and commodifying it. So you might have seen this whole crazy thing on the internet, drives me crazy every time I see it. These fake kahuna people who are doing ho'oponopono and doing fake chanting. It's really crazy. The whole thing, if you look on TikTok, you will like find it. People trying to commodify like the word poke, aloha poke. Now we can't use the word poke to like even like make our own food. Can we trademark and copyright it? This image in the middle is this famous Hawaiian photographer, Kim Taylor Reese. And she tried to say that this photo that she took of a Hawaiian dancer means that she has copyrighted this move. Now, if you are a Native Hawaiian practitioner and you're a dancer, does that mean like you can no longer do this choreographic step? It might be choreography to some, or it could be like a very important symbolic way to, not physically demonstrate, natural phenomenon. So there's all kinds of things. A seaweed diet can help cows fart less. What's the story with that? P.S. The company just gave oceanography seminar yesterday. For those of you who have been around long enough, UH has been embroiled in GMO kalo kind of patenting. So it's all very complicated. Oh, like, don't forget noni juice, all of that. So there's a lot of questions around that. Okay, where do our Hawaiian rights come from if we don't have federal recognition? So we have rights stemming from the international realm. This is word salad, just like, I know you're gonna be like, oh my God, I'm just gonna like generally read it to you. First, we have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Article 31 words are there. I'm just gonna read the titles to save you guys. Article 31 states that Indigenous peoples have the rights to control, protect, and develop their culture and its associated IP, intellectual property, aka knowledge, data. Article 12, Section 2 provides Indigenous peoples restitution for intellectual property that's taken without free, prior, informed consent or in violation of traditional laws or customs. The state of Hawaii further supports this. So even though we're not recognized on the federal level, our state constitution is required to protect natural resources and traditional Native Hawaiian rights. This is actually one of the most important laws that we have in Hawaii in our constitution today. Particularly, I know Katy knows this and I don't know where it is, but maybe I deleted that slide, but it's in our state constitution. The key points are Article 9, Section 1 and Article 12, Section 7. Okay. So that we have these protections on the state level. What about our university? Because the university is a state institution. So let's talk a little bit about how intellectual property and the university have kind of like formed this relationship. I just think it's really interesting. We have RCUH, which is the Research Corporation of Hawaii, University of Hawaii. Did you know that the idea of a research corporation is a more broad national concept? Over 100 years ago, the Research Corporation, which is a private corporation, was formed to manage university patents. Didn't you know that? Yeah. MIT was the first to partner with research corporation. So when we use the word research corporation of UH, we're like a subsidiary of a giant private corporation called Research Corporation. By the 60s, about 100 universities had agreements with Research Corporation to manage their patents. And you can see in 1965, we were formed to conduct and develop research projects. Research Corporation continued to encourage universities to assume their own patent duties, resulting in the creation of offices of technology transfer. So it's really, really interesting because trying to kind of think about how best to, I want Katy to articulate it. You articulate this way better than me, this kind of like weird conflict.
So I was excited when I learned about this history because I feel like sometimes when we talk with folks within the university about how they think about intellectual property, how they think about like knowledge and access, we come up with what I sort of indelicately talk about as like a little bit of a schizophrenic view about knowledge and information. Like on the one hand, we have this sense that the university is here to serve the public, and we often have federally funded projects, and we're aiming towards a world where we have increasing open access. Knowledge is available to everyone, and this like democratization of knowledge. And this is seen as like a really valuable thing that we are aiming for. But then on the other hand, a lot of kind of the currency of academia is knowledge and data and information, right? And that currency is something you kind of want to guard for yourself. You don't want to be having your research scooped. You don't want to be sharing information too broadly. And also there's sort of, I think, increasingly in the last couple of decades, this idea that there are financial benefits to kind of inventing things within the university, right? And you have patentable technology. And so I was interested to see that that comes from a very specific law at the federal level, the Boyd-Doyle Act in 1980. Previous to that, you were not able, the university could not retain title to federally funded inventions, basically. So if a project was federally funded and it resulted in some kind of new technology or invention, you could not like make that the property of the university, right? Or make that something the university profited off of because it was a federally funded thing. And that legislation changed that and created a little bit this dichotomy where we are both a public service institution with publicly funded science, but also there's this incentive for like privatization and patenting of information and inventions out of universities. So I just thought that was interesting.
Very good. So, and I thought it was really interesting that even our ideas about who should have access to our data seem to be very binary, almost in a way as well. And it was like everybody, but wait, it depends. And it's just so interesting to see like what are some of the rules and laws that are like so implicit within universities that we don't even realize, and yet we've like normalized in our ideas of what research is and how it should be like practiced. Okay, so just a couple bit more of UH, because I think it is important for us to know our own institutional history. Is you know, in 1987, Governor Waihee asks for a proposal to support local economic activities. Then, you know, OTTED is established. This business magazine is like criticizing UH, like you're like a losing operation, there's no resources. Meanwhile, Stanford versus Roche is a big pharmaceutical corporation, says that inventions belong to their inventors, and it does not automatically confer title to federally funded inventions. So as a result, universities are creating even more stringent agreements with their inventions. And then this is now what we know today, the Office of Innovation and Commercialization. And you know, it's perceived having lack of clear, express legal authority for technology transfer. So this is kind of where we are at our university right now. I think it's important for us to know, be on the know. Okay, so what are we supposed to do with this information? Okay, seems like most of us have either intentionally or unintentionally collected Indigenous data. Seems like there's this thing called Indigenous sovereignty and data sovereignty and governance. Data sovereignty and governance seems like, should we be open source, open everything? Should we be like protecting our, you know, knowledge and inventions? What should we do? All of this while we're trying to be like good people and just do right by ourselves and the communities that we're doing research in. There are a couple of different models for Indigenous data sharing. Let me tell you, first of all, the reason why I'm sharing models not at UH is because we don't have one right now. That's part of why we're here to talk to you guys about this, because we see this as an opportunity for us to begin to think about, might we want to kind of create Indigenous models for Indigenous data sharing that are equitable and all of that good stuff. So there are different models. The University of Washington has come up with a bunch of templates that you can use. Alberta First Nations have the whole framework for data sharing. The Confederated Tribes of the Watilla Indian Reservation Territory and Oregon State University have come up with them. And even in Hawaii, we have had, from the practitioner side, not from the university side, the community has come up with a thing called the Paukalani Declaration. Now this sounds amazing, and you might be like, no, why? How come these places have done it and UH hasn't? It's arisen from bad actors having to course correct and make themselves correct. And that's where these arose from. A lot of these arose, this one in particular, I believe arose from some genetic materials that were like improperly handled. So a lot of this is reactionary. And what I'm hoping is that we can be proactive as we move forward in our projects. So I want to talk about now a framework that was not developed by me, but we definitely collaborate with the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, also known as GIDA. And a lot of the people behind this are Dr. Stephanie Carroll and Jewel Cummins, as well as Andrew Martinez. So the slides that I'm going to show you definitely come from them, but this is another framework that is really being promulgated. And I think one of the reasons why we should consider this as data scientists is because it is seen as complementary to the FAIR's data principles. So there's FAIR and then there's CARE. And so that's why I think we should think about this. Okay, so let's reframe now, right? So this is like a major reframe. We should begin to think of everybody as a data actor, not just like a data generator, a data collector. And within that, what we're looking for is Indigenous data sovereignty and in the hopes to create relationships for Indigenous data governance. So we have both federally recognized and non-recognized, right? Within this space, data actors, data everything. So you have data repositories. Those are people you have to like upload your data to, right? You have publishers, which is those predatory publishers, and like why we can't get access to things that you make because the subscriptions are so high. There's the researchers, that's us. You know, we have universities, we have granting agencies, we have other governments. So you can see at different levels, all of these actors have some kind of, sometimes at some point, if you try to publish, if you try to get a grant, they all have some kind of like data management thing that they want from you. So the question is, how do we navigate this minefield almost, and be good people when it comes to Indigenous data sovereignty? Okay. So just so they have the FAIR principles, FAIR being findable, accessible, interoperable, and replicable, the Global Indigenous Data Alliance has come up with CARES principles. So CARES stands for collective benefit. In other words, how do we design data ecosystems? We're like talking like real stuff I can't do, but maybe you guys can do. Design data ecosystems to function in ways that enable Indigenous people to derive benefit for inclusive development, for improved governance, and for equitable outcomes. How do we ensure that the way that we design our data structures are responsible? So those who are working with Indigenous data, how do we share how those data are used to support Indigenous people's self-determination and collective benefit? For positive relationships, for expanding capability and capacity, and for expanding worldviews and supporting language. A is authority to control. Indigenous people's rights and interests must be recognized, and their authority to kind of control such data should be respected. It's a pretty hot button issue. You can see it's like indirect conflict potentially with like whose rights is it? So, but maybe instead of saying it's just mine, maybe we can say there's shared rights. Okay, yes, the university has rights, but they have Native peoples have rights too. So ethical, the well-being should be the primary concern at all stages of the data cycle and across the data ecosystem. So we can see that if we just take a pause and look at what CARE stands for, it's very positive, but it also is well in alignment with our goal of becoming a Native Hawaiian place of learning here at Manoa. Okay, so the 5 A's for appropriate action and how to do this are authority. How do we need to think about access, like who is able to access this? Have we thought about authorship? Who is going to be included at the table as who gets to have the credit for being a co-author? Or how are we attributing this data? Or even acknowledgement? Okay, so those are some of the 5 A's. But let's get even more specific. How do we actually support Indigenous data sovereignty? Other than recognizing and promoting sovereignty, how do we center Indigenous values when working with Indigenous communities? How do we conduct scholarship that is in service to the community? Can we build research or capacity within the communities as we're conducting the research? How can we use the already existing kind of protocols that these folks might have in place and kind of build upon that? So not kind of go against it, but work with it. And how can we support Indigenous scholars, either in the communities or in the academies, and include them to help them to review some of the work that we are doing? All right, so I'm gonna get even more specific because this paper just came out. So the reason why I like this is because it gives even more kind of like actions. Because I know people are like, it sounds good, like actually, what do I do? So under the CARE, the C, collective benefit, prior to research, try to explain and demonstrate how your research potentially results and are relevant to the value and interests of the community. Research to support community-led initiatives and secure funding for long-term investments in community. Can we develop or use Indigenous classification frameworks? This one's pretty good, that reflect their community values. And can we include local experts in the research team? Can we collect and code use categories and identify the communities in ways that they define, that disaggregate data in ways that is of interest to them, that matter or relevant to them, especially when we're talking about global or geospatial data sets, so that it's more relevant, so that those communities can use it in ways that are relevant to them. Is it possible for us to compensate community experts throughout the process, including research proposal development, data collection, manuscript, and community review? So those are some like real actionable items. Under authority, yeah. The name of the paper. Oh, I will share that after. Yeah, I will share it. I'll provide links. Under A, we have, can we establish institutional principles or protocols? This is something that Katy and I are like trying to actively work on, and we're always down for anybody who wants to come like the good fight with us as far as like bureaucratic activism. It's supporting Indigenous data sovereignty. This one is something I think we can think about. Have we thought about including metadata fields that allow us to have something about, you know, is this data one that needs disclosure of Indigenous rights and interests? Can we ensure that data use is consistent with individual and community consent provisions and ensure ongoing consent in the process? How can we ensure that Indigenous communities have access to the data and also the metadata about their communities in a usable format? And how can we return that output, you know, to appropriate authorities? How can we ensure community ownership of data? And I'm using, I think the word ownership is used here because it's in like a Western sense. How can we use Indigenous frameworks and principles to inform data management protocols, and who, where, or what that is conducted? Okay. For responsibility, how can we expand opportunities through participatory methods, initiatives to help enable the design and collection? And can we record traditional knowledge and biocultural labels? There's actually a platform called Local Context. I didn't have time, I didn't want to put that, like, I didn't want to promulgate one in particular, but there is an actual data platform that it utilizes meta labels. And so this has actually been utilized in a couple places to ensure that review of the publications. Can we identify and address sensitive data? Because the idea is that even though we as a Western society may think that all the data should be open all the time, different Indigenous peoples may have certain data that's protected for different reasons, and you know, only certain groups of people should have access to them. And we can utilize our data infrastructures to kind of identify which types of data are sensitive. Can we utilize the languages of Indigenous peoples to affirm their worldviews? Can you upload the data with the right labels? Like, this is traditional knowledge. You know, biocultural labels and provenance in cultural accessible forms. And can we conduct research that is consent-driven? All right. The last one around ethics is, how do we address our research? Kind of using Indigenous ethical frameworks, community-defined review processes. Researchers, can you guys explain the benefits to the communities and identify and contribute to community-defined benefits, like what these communities want to do? Again, using a lot of Indigenous ethical frameworks and code of conduct and language that is accessible. Can we apply those for infrastructure as well as your metadata and secondary use, and tribal affiliation maybe, and things that will allow and better define the reuse of data, or maybe even allow the removal of data or requests to return disposal requests from aggregated data to recognize. Okay, I promise I will send this. So just if you're like, oh my God, all of this stuff, I don't know. Katy and I have been working for the past 6 years on an ethical research guidance called the Ulana no. And as part of that, we have developed just like an entry level like step into it. And Katy has brought hard copies of the Ulana no for people if you guys want some. So you can take a look at it. I just want to say before we give those out, like, always comes with a warning that our Kulananui training is not this is not a Kulananui training. Like this little book here, it's not a checklist for achieving reciprocal community research partnerships. It is a set of values and ideas that when applied along hard work can build more just and generative relationships. It's just a starting point. So within that, one of the things we address is this really sticky issue of knowledge stewardship. So these are some questions that you can start to ask yourselves as we move closer to like, how can we operationalize CARE's principles in our own lives? So kind of sit with yourself. What are the values related to knowledge stewardship that you might have? And how might they be similar as well as different from the communities that you're working in? Ask yourself the same question when you think about knowledge access. We kind of had a survey about it, but really sit with yourself and ask that of the community members or the people you're working with. And how can these common values be reinforced? What's the process or timeline for the members for this data to be available? Who has got decision-making power? I mean, even something as simple as, will this all be stored in Google Drive? Because UH has like a storage limit and we can't be like going over that. What information and data should have limited access? What protocols will ensure appropriate access? Should be password protected? Who gets the password? Whose even server is it stored on? What information formats might be the most useful to the community? Is QGIS really going to be really useful to them? Or is it more likely to be like a PDF or like a JPEG? That this may change across different segments across the community. What are some of the consequences? Now, this is like us this is the part that's hard for me, even as a researcher, to think about, but we got to start thinking into this space. What are the potential consequences of outside entities accessing this information? Because now, if you have big data and these big data sets are openly available, you can have secondary folks come in who are not even directly related to those indigenous communities, come in and extract that data. Now you might be like, that's totally awesome, but there might be some other consequences of accessing that information. Think about that in terms of government agencies, insurance companies, media, funders, other researchers. So how might that information or data be misused or appropriated? These are not just questions that are specific to indigenous communities. These are questions we need to be asking ourselves of data that's being like mined about us right now. What's our plan for developing data products and what are the roles and responsibilities? And then this one's really, really important. And this is why I went through that whole rigmarole about talking about the university. You need to know what our institutional clauses or policies and agreements are when it comes to data ownership and access that might apply to that project. The people you work with need to know that federal funding requirements may mean that their data has to be publicly available. They need to know that. That's part of like informed consent. Does it mean that the data has to be shared publicly? Or what about the academic policies that award that institution in terms of intellectual property rights? They need to know that too. For research conducted by students and by faculty. And you need to know that too, as students and faculty. What are your rights to the things that you have produced? I don't know, Katy, do you have anything else to add to this particular one?
Okay, this is like a little bit my soapbox, but sometimes when we have researchers that work closely with community, they don't necessarily want to bring up these topics. They seem scary or formal, or they feel like it will impact their relationship with their community partners in ways that are like negative. And what we often say to keep in mind is like, even if I have the best of intentions and I'm not intending to misuse or misappropriate information or data that's being collected through a project, I by myself am not in control necessarily of what happens to that information, right? And there are a whole bunch of institutions that stand behind me. So even if I think that I'm keeping a relationship informal or trust-based or less like contract-based, there are formalized mechanisms that I am bound to based on the institutions that I'm connected to and the institutions. So it's one of these things where sometimes like you're leaving your partners unprotected by trying to keep things simple and less formal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Just thinking about that. Carry on, okay. And now, after we've like kind of depressed you maybe, now we're gonna talk about some real research scenarios. Oh yeah, let's pause for questions. Pausing for questions is always good. I will get you guys the link to that article, but do you guys have any questions? Yeah, oh, okay, wait, okay, we'll start from there.
There are some people online who are.
Okay, yes, I will give you guys access to the scenarios. Any other questions? Casey?
Yeah.
Thank you, Rosie. That was so good. I see it as being so helpful in how to be really cautious moving forward.
Yeah.
But I'm also wondering about looking back with data synthesis. And that feels like a minefield because we don't know the circumstances under which those data are collected. And if we compile them and share them, as we often do, are we perpetuating these wrongdoings, or what's the guidance for that?
Katie, you got any ideas? I mean, honestly, yeah, I don't have good answers. I think that's what I want to say is what we presented to you is literally the cutting edge of what we are thinking about right now.
One of the things that we often get asked about, like in the broader context of the Ulana and ʻIke, is how do I know like what community is in the context of my research? And one of the things we sometimes say is think about who are the people or the resources who might be impacted by the information you're collecting, or like what are the decisions that could be made with the information you're collecting, and who would that impact? So that's one thing you could apply for like a little bit of a retrospective, is to say like, okay, if you're synthesizing data, you're making some kind of data product, who's gonna use that? Like, what's that information gonna feed into in terms of decision making, and who will be impacted by those decisions? And maybe that's a chance to try to connect with those people and say like, this information is going to come out, and get a little bit of a sense of their input on it. That's how I think about it. What decisions will be made with this information?
Yeah. Any additional questions? But you are totally right. It is a minefield. I myself am complicit in like synthesizing data for which I don't know the provenance of every, yeah, I think what I want to say maybe by like to decrease the pressure of trying to do right is say we are all messing up. But our main thing that we can do is commit to like trying to do better right now and moving forward. And we're still gonna mess up. Messing up is not like, we can't be perfect moving forward. So let's just like relieve ourselves of that tension and be like, okay, we're gonna mess up moving forward. We're just gonna move forward and try our best. I think that's the best thing that I can say is I don't wanna be like, I'm not gonna vilify anybody for that, right? Like, we just gotta try our best. Yeah. Other questions? Shivani and then.
Have you guys thought about very special principles for aggregating Indigenous data with non-Indigenous data?
I think that happens a lot, like all the time. Yeah.
Right, these also, the way you presented how to express it only for.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that these are there are special considerations, but I certainly think that these things could apply broadly. Like I said, like when I was like, we should be concerned about like, everybody should be concerned about like all of the data being mined on us like right now, for sure. And I think in many ways, I think that Indigenous communities are to be highlighted because they're especially vulnerable because of historical kind of, you know, all of those sad US laws that are, you know, so they're like in an especially vulnerable category, and in a kind of messed up way, well, not really messed up. There's different ways you can kind of think about this. You can kind of think about it as I can do the bare minimum, right? Or I can maximally protect. And I think if we think about Indigenous communities as who you would like maximally protect, and therefore that might, if we adopt that, I think it could maximally protect the rest of society, as opposed to like, this is our bar much lower. And then we have to like keep making special exceptions for Indigenous communities. So I think that's like different ways. I think it is completely applicable if we adopt CARES principles for like everybody. But as I said, I think there's like, at this particular moment in time, I think there's like particular vulnerabilities that exist for Indigenous communities. If that makes sense. And also open for commentary. I don't know. Anthony, you look like you want to say something.
And you?
Yeah. I just thought, you know, like back and forth.
I mean, I think so much of it's very focused on media and consideration, but it's so much of the work that we do is like really esoteric. It's Indigenous data, and that it involves extracting data from people and communities in one way or another. But the research that it sort of the reason that we collect it. It's really hard to explain to anyone. It's not very important immediately to people. It's very esoteric, and a lot of the framework requires buy-in, right? It's a lot of very dialogical. It's great, but I can't really articulate why it's useful, to anyone other than theoreticians. How can I expect to get that buy-in if I can't expect to get that buy-in from why shouldn't anybody really care about the data?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's kind of like the climate change argument. You know what I mean? Like, why should we care about climate change? Because like, I think that's the thing, like what you said is I think exactly the complement to what the person sitting next to you just said, which is these principles can apply to everybody. And so why not? Yeah. Any other thoughts before we embark on scenarios? Okay, Katy, you want to take us away on the scenarios?
Sure. So one of the things that we sometimes do when we have longer workshops about these research ethics that Rosie discussed is we do what we call scenarios, which are little like conundrums that we ask people to discuss and talk through and think about how they apply. And I think it's helpful because you can say things like, always be protecting collective ownership. But like, what does that mean in actuality, in practice, right? When you have like real decisions to be made in real research projects. So I think it's helpful in that context. I will give the caveat that we most often work with folks that do a little bit more like applied field research.
Or science folks.
So, and we didn't feel like we had the expertise or the knowledge to develop scenarios that would be like really from the perspective of a more like data science discipline. I don't even know what to call that discipline. How that is. So I will be curious to hear your thoughts on these scenarios and how you see some of the general themes that play in them applying within your own fields, perhaps. But we have 3 sets, so maybe folks could form 3 groups. Maybe you have just like 2 or 3 people from this middle one move over to this far table. And they're just like little short conundrums. Large groups, sorry, should have printed more. So you can just like look through them. I recommend just like picking one to start reading it out loud and talking about it as a group. Or if you feel like your group is too big, you can break them up and like swap out a little bit. But just like take some time to talk through them, talk through like what's happening, what are some of the issues at play. Do you see reflections of what Rosie talked about in these? What might you do? So yeah.
All right, so okay. All right. Take one and then yeah.
Just like go through them and then we'll just like, if you don't get to them all the time, just pick one, play with it.
Yeah.
Okay, you're into welfare. This is our proposal to evaluate the scholar early.
I know. Oh, I don't know, it's okay. Sorry. Have them on here.
Good biomedical.
I don't think that can be much.
Yeah.
Yeah, look down there.
No, I don't remember this is in the last.
Bifurcated, yeah, at odds. I don't know. Conflicting, false, what is it, dichotomy? I don't know, yeah. Conflicting, I don't know. Conflicting. Yeah. At odds. Opposition. Sorry. No. I thought it was great when you said it, and then afterwards I was like.
Function.
just sparked good conversation, or you had a lot to do in this one.
Can we start with the online groups?
We can start with the online groups. If we might have to, I don't know if we can
Oh,
get
yeah.
audio from them.
We might need technical assistance. Or should it just be fine for the online groups? Okay. Okay, so you guys should be able to unmute yourselves. I know one group had Brenda and Ulana, I think, and Teresa. Would you folks be willing to share, like, what is one scenario? Should we do one scenario that maybe you spent some time on, and you know what really resonated or kind of stood out to you? Was I muted when I said that?
Sorry.
Are you guys muted or am I muted?
We can hear you. You just caught us like we're first. I think at least that was my reaction.
Actually, it was interesting because we were a different mix. You know, Rosie, that I'm a administrator, fiscal manager, and so I'm just interested in the presentation to hear, just to hear the different things that you folks have to experience, or just it was interesting. And I actually, it was great to talk to Ulana and Brenda about this, and Ulana actually gave such a great gave us good insight with her background, and because it's truly, I was like, I wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. I was like, I'm not gonna get, like, I know how important that those kind of prime spots are and everything. I'm like, I'm not touching that. And I think Ulana actually articulated it perfectly. I mean, and not to put you on the spot, but
I think we did scenarios 1 to 3. The first one is just because okay, you can tell from my background, community-based subsistence fishing area. So this is Miloli'i, endearingly called the last Hawaiian fishing village, for the reasons of our community holds on tight to its traditional practices that goes back, and like currently we have 5th and 6th generation of those families that have always lived in the area. So with that generational knowledge, today we still practice that. But just a year ago, we had our rules promulgated for our CBSFA, or community-based subsistence fishing area. And the important thing about this is one, if not the only law in marine managed areas where you get this designation based on traditional and customary practices. And so the process includes the community identifying all its traditional practices and so forth. So you can see right then and there, it makes us super vulnerable, because from the get-go, we have to prove that we do all these practices. And when we do our numbers, the numbers of fish counts and so forth, this is something that a lot of researchers like to come into our waters and perform. So in something like this, what we do is we know, and we find out, because researchers come to us and say, oh, we want to do research, we don't need any of your help. It's like, okay, you don't need any help, that's fine, but what are you doing, and what kind of data are you collecting? And when it comes to, and this is exactly one of them, and we say, well, we asked you not to reveal the exact GPS locations. We know what a special access permit looks like. So we know the data that is logged and given to the Division of Aquatic Resources. So we say not to divulge the information in your explanation and your studies and your research, that you actually explain maybe the features of the area that talk to why, or your findings that talk to why the numbers are greater or not so great, or so forth. But you never divulge where it is, because we will be dealing with a lot of fishes coming to these areas and just wiping out the entire, and it takes forever to grow, even for 1 year. So that's the value of a knowledge, being that for a community like ours, we're a subsistence fishing area. We don't go fishing, we live like right next to all these ko'as and all these locations of our resources. It's our ice box. So so this is how when researchers come, we have a data agreement on our part that we ask them to acknowledge. And we even go far as we request a briefing on the results before they present out anywhere else. And we request a copy of raw data too.
You.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming to this seminar. You have really put a face to exactly what we're talking about as far as like community practitioners. Tita Huilani is our community. I mean, like Huilani is a practitioner who is a resource user and a scientific knowledge holder and gatherer. So I just want to thank you for coming and participating in this conversation. I think this really puts literal face to the questions and why we at the university are trying really hard to move forward and be better with the way that our practices. So thank you for sharing. Let's go to somebody in the room now, but thank you so much for sharing that information. That was so valuable, I think, for everybody to hear. Okay, Katy, pick somebody in the room.
Why don't we start with this table? Do you all have a scenario you want to share? Maybe you could read it to us and tell us what you talked about, please.
So I think the one we talked the most about was you're developing a research proposal to evaluate the suitability of different native Hawaiian means seaweed for cultivation and aquaculture. What issues of knowledge ownership and access should you consider in your data management and community outreach planning? And I think immediately off the jump, we kind of talked about how important it would be to describe and define what the intention of the aquaculture project is, if it's for research or restoration, or if it's going to be something that's like a commodity at some point, and that would strongly, impact what kind of management plan you come up with. Someone else want to jump in? Yeah, and then we also kind of ventured into this language, the Hawaiian language student working on a Hawaiian translation project. That scenario, I think that kind of summed all of this. Yeah.
Did anyone else talk about the Hawaiian language scenario? Do you all have thoughts on that one, or what did you talk about in the context?
We want to say there's like no right answer.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people want to know like what happened, what's the right answer? We're like, no right answer.
Yeah, so we talked about this one, and I think the first thing that jumped out to me was the
Sorry, do you mind reading it quick? Because not
Yes.
everybody has all the same
Of
scenarios.
course, okay. Hawaiian language students working on a climate translation project have uploaded their project to an open access database. A researcher from another university uses this information to reconstruct climate patterns in Hawaii and submits a single author abstract on data mining for an upcoming workshop. How should Hawaiian knowledge production be properly attributed? So one of the main things that first jumped out to me when reading this was students, class project, and then someone else single author abstract on regardless of the rest of the context, that just seems wrong. Faculty should not be taking advantage of student researchers doing the work and then not involving them in further in the process or giving them, yeah, so that was red flag number one.
Yeah, that doesn't even have to be indigenous knowledge. That
No.
yeah.
And then I think we kind of got stuck at the end because we ran out of time, but we started trying to talk about okay, this is the question is specifically about Hawaiian knowledge production. And we don't really know who these students are or what their backgrounds. We know they're studying Hawaiian language, studying a little bit of Hawaii, but we don't know where they're from or if they're from Hawaii or if they're Hawaiian. And so there's sort of a question there, just wanting a little bit more information about the class and the students and what that process was like. And then questions about, okay, well, should their work, the students in the class, have been put into this open access database in the first place? Because we don't know about they're taking this community knowledge and doing this work and then putting it in this open access database that then meant that it was vulnerable to being used by some researcher at some other university. And then of course the professor who wrote the single author manuscript should also be asking like similar questions about the ways in which they're taking those data and like using them in this workshop, and then like allowing those data to be like accessed and used by all the people that are attending. So lots of things seem to have gone wrong in this, and we didn't really come up with any solutions.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think also something, if that I want to explain is these students might not, what level are they as far as language translators? Maybe their translations need some editing, maybe they're not fully proficient, and so kind of like, it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out scenario where, you know, you take a level, you know, you could take like, this is not to be offensive to those students, but say it's like second year language proficiency, but now somebody's doing like language modeling on that. The reliability of that information may not be the best, as if you were to have involved like, you know, primary language speakers, or like, you know, have more context for students who might not know. And there's nothing wrong with what the students did, that was their assignment. But it's like, how do you utilize that? Is that an appropriate action to do? Yeah. Okay. Wait, I just want to go to the people online one more time. Sorry, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think the other group had Haley, Kelly, I think Jan and Eric, maybe? If you folks can share a scenario that you kind of talked through and something that resonated for you. Sorry to put you guys on the spot. Okay.
I can speak for the group. Sorry, I
Thanks,
was waiting to
Kelly.
see if everyone else was speaking first. So we talked through, I think it was 3 of them, but the first one we talked through was, it was 4, the one about sharks. And we just talked about how important it was to just have consent from whoever you're working with, and in this case, the local fishing family. If you're going to take samples, that should be a conversation that needs to be had well before you conduct your research or your project. And also, we talked about this part in a different scenario, but I think it can also be applied to this one, how just sitting down with whoever your partner is, or whoever you're working with closely in that community, you should just go through all of your intentions of your research and the plans that you have, what you might do, if you're taking samples, if you're taking pictures, if there's any harm involved, that should be put on the table before you even start your project.
That's awesome. Very good. Very good. And then just like final thoughts from this last group here, like what scenario did you choose and like what kind of resonated?
You're researching diversity on marine sponges in American Samoa. In the course of your project, you realize that some of your findings, once published, could be used by other researchers within academia or private companies to identify marine sponge species with high pharmaceutical potential. Sponges with chemical compounds that could be used to produce new pharmaceuticals. How do you proceed in publishing and disseminating your findings? So I mean, the first thing that came to mind for me was like just being very specific about what kind of location data you're going to publish or how you're going to share that type of information. And one thing that I was just thinking about was if you're trying to include local stakeholders in decisions like this, like how do you go about finding community members that will like care about this type of stuff if you're just going to American Samoa without any sort of, yeah.
Ideally, we wouldn't be going to American Samoa without any sort of like local context or local partners, right?
Yeah.
Ideally, we would have
Develop those
some
relationships.
kind of standing relationship with folks on the ground. American Samoa is a little bit easier maybe because there's more governance structure locally that you could like consult with and be more formalized about. I think so. For example, if we were talking about like a specific bay and in Hawaii and we wanted to consult with people, you gotta be kind of creative, right? Like I think you have to
You have to do your homework.
You have to do your homework and you have to be willing to go where people are. Like, you can't expect to just be like, I'm gonna put together a meeting and people are gonna spend their free time coming to my meeting and not, right? So you kind of have to be willing to like turn up somewhere where people are already gathering, build relationships over time, and then, you know, like find the avenues to share that.
And I think
information.
also in the case of Hawaii, because there has been so much displacement because of, you know, historical kind of land things that have happened that are unfortunate, people who still have relationship to those spaces might not physically live close by. So that's even more why you got to do your homework of like, who are the lineal descendants who might have this knowledge or who might have the word is kuleana, which is responsibility and rights to kind of still maintain that. So it can be pretty tricky in Hawaii, whereas in American Samoa, you know, non-American Samoans cannot own land. You have very strong village systems with pulenu'u, and like it is a bit more hierarchical, and those are still intact. So it is a little bit actually more easy to access those societal structures. So thank you so much. We wanted to end at 3:30. We just wanted to let you know, as far as future directions and takeaways, UH has extremely limited capacity and infrastructure to protect Indigenous knowledge and data sovereignty. Like I said, we are literally the cutting edge right now. You guys are like, we have now initiated you, and now you know more than most people on campus about this. Katy and my goal continues to be to identify and address barriers to co-production at the University of Hawaii. And I think one thing that's really nice is this kind of, this is part of the EPSCoR funding, and we are working with the EPSCoR team to develop curriculum and practices to try and operationalize care principles. This is like our very first event, but we hope to continue to have events like this so we can work with those who are being supported by the EPSCoR to develop data management plans, to kind of think about as you design your experiments and as we collect that data, how do we continue to operationalize and make it, you know, collective benefit and ethical and all of that good stuff. We are participants in the Earth Data Relations Working Group, which is part of NEON, and I'm actually co-writing a review to talk about Indigenous data sovereignty and Earth data right now. Hopefully that'll come out very soon. And finally, just want to leave it to you as like, there are no clear answers, as you can see, and if you have any ideas for how we might begin to operationalize care or just anything, we are always, Katy and I are always open and welcome to hearing that. And you can find our information here. I'm Rosie Alegado, and this is Katy Hintzen. So thank you so much for joining us here today.